all set? Okay. So I'm going to call this meeting of the school committee to order. It's 6:06. And we have a quorum present. And then the first item of business is the first read of the general and interim emergency policy on COVID-19 related issues for the 2022-2023 school year, which is a draft. If you note, it was updated today at the policy advisory meeting. Mostly just some words and some links were added. No substantive change. I will comment though that pretty much right after the policy committee meeting, the CDC changed the recommendations for COVID. So while most of this is just general around how the schools will manage COVID, the details of the protocols will be adjusted based on what RIDO and the CDC recommend as that is available. But as with all things in the pandemic, it's hard to keep up sometimes. So if somebody would like to read the policy. You go for it. Yeah, you guys can split it if you want. It's 4 pages.
No, I'm fine.
You can just roll it. Okay, go.
Okay, sure. General and interim emergency policy on COVID-19 related issues, 2022-2023 school year. A background. On August 4th, 2022, Governor Daniel J. McKee issued Executive Order 22-31, which extends Executive Order 20-02, declaring a state of emergency due to the dangers to health and life posed by SARS-CoV-2. On or about June 24th, 2022, the Rhode Island Department of Health, RIDO, issued an updated guidance for COVID-19 prevention strategies in pre-K through 12 schools. That is linked. In addition, the Rhode Island Department of Education, RIDE, has directed that all local educational agencies, LEAs, which includes the Barrington Public Schools, must complete their checklist for COVID-19 mitigation strategies for the 2022-2023 school year by or before August 8th, 2022. RIDE has further directed that all LEAs must submit their updated back-to-school plan to RIDE by or before August 22nd, 2022. All such submissions and posting must be publicly accessible. In light of the above referenced public health declarations and measures, and in accordance with Rhode Island General Laws 16-2-9, parentheses A, including without limitation subparagraphs parentheses A, parentheses 1, parentheses 2, parentheses 5, parentheses 8, parentheses 24, which individually and together vest in the Barrington School Committee the responsibility of addressing the needs, care, health, and wellness of the Barrington Public Schools, BPSs, students, staff, and community members. The school committee is reissuing an updated and amended general and interim emergency policy on COVID-19 related issues. B, purpose. This 2022-2023 COVID-19 policy reaffirms the school committee's commitment to promoting and ensuring the health and safety of students and staff and all who may come into contact with them through reliance on science, data, and public health leadership to inform decision-making. Providing and maintaining to the extent possible a high quality and effective level of educational services by operating schools and related programs for the 2022-2023 school year so that students can receive such programming and services in person during the school week for the entire school year, subject to certain limited exceptions, including mandates by RIDO to remain under quarantine or in isolation, and ensuring academic support for students in general and those at highest risk educationally and socioeconomically in particular. C, policy background and components. For the 2020-2021 school year, the Barrington School Committee adopted a general and interim emergency policy on COVID-19 related issues, COVID-19 policy. On September 2nd, 2021, the school committee amended that COVID-19 policy for the 2021-2022 school year, amended COVID-19 policy. On June 16th, 2022, the school committee further amended the amended COVID-19 policy to reflect the current conditions of the COVID-19 pandemic and made those changes applicable through the end of the 2022-2023 school year to include extended school year and summer school. On July 28th, 2022, the school committee readopted and reissued the amended COVID-19 policy to ensure that the amended COVID-19 policy was retroactive to September 2nd, 2021. The school committee now adopts this updated and amended general interim emergency policy on COVID-19 related issues for the 2022-2023 school year. This policy reflects the school committee's decisions regarding specific aspects of the implementation of the requirements by the Rhode Island Department of Education, RIDE, and the guidance by the Rhode Island Department of Health, RIDO, to revisit and update back-to-school plans to reflect alignment with current COVID-19 health guidance. 1. Vaccinations. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, defines, quote, fully vaccinated as receiving 2 doses of the mRNA series Moderna or Pfizer BioNTech vaccine, or 1 dose of the Johnson & Johnson, J&J, or Janssen vaccine, J&J. The CDC defines up to date as receiving all COVID-19 vaccine boosters when and if eligible. All BPS staff must be fully vaccinated as a condition of employment. The BPS administration will consider and evaluate requests for exemptions from the vaccine mandate in accordance with federal and state law on a case-by-case basis. The school committee strongly recommends that all staff and volunteers be up to date with their vaccinations. If a staff member is not up to date, then they shall be tested weekly for COVID-19 on the schedule of either Monday and Wednesday or Tuesday and Thursday at their school building, with the process and expense of such testing to be covered by BPS. If a volunteer is not up to date and works within 6 feet of adults or students in an indoor space for 15 or more minutes, they must test each day they volunteer and wear a well-fitted mask at all times. All non-volunteer visitors, vendors, and families who are in school buildings conducting business, vendors, or attending school meetings shall be required to wear masks if spacing of 6 feet is not possible, and if they are in a room for 15 or more minutes regardless of their vaccination status. 2. Quarantine and isolation protocols. The BPS quarantine and isolation protocols can be found in the BPS Awareness 2022-2023 COVID Back to School Awareness Plan, which can be found here, linked in the policy. These protocols may change as directives and guidance from RIDO and RIDE change over the school year. 3. Remote teaching and learning. Under the awareness plan, BPS shall provide short-term remote teaching and learning options, i.e. through Zoom, to students subject to quarantine or isolation. 4. Family and student privacy. BPS, which includes all staff, shall remain attentive to protecting and respecting the privacy of students and families who may be accessing instruction remotely. Student privacy rights extend to the confidentiality of student academic records, health data, economic status, and other information that may be considered protected by law. Students shall not be recorded in any classrooms by audio, visual, or remote means without, or if of by age or of age by individual students. During periods of remote learning, the privacy of students participating in online classes shall not be violated by recording them without appropriate notice, which shall be provided through the school handbooks and referenced in the following policies: video and audio recording policy, linked, and technology responsible use policy, also. 5. Illness and contact tracing. The BPS illness and contact tracing protocols can be found in the BPS awareness plan, which can be found here, linked. These protocols may change as directives and guidance from RIDO and RIDE change over the school year. 6. Operations and plant maintenance. The BPS operations and maintenance protocols can be found in the BPS awareness plan, which can be found here. These protocols may change as directives and guidance from RIDO and RIDE change over the school year. D. Duration. The COVID-19 policy shall apply through the conclusion of the 2022-2023 school year to include extended school year and summer school ending in early August 2023, unless amended and or rescinded prior to the close of the school year as conditions of the pandemic change. First read August 19th, 2020, approved September 3rd, 2020, amended first read August 24th, 2021, amended approved September 2nd, 2021, amended first read May 19th, 2022, amended approved June 16th, 2022, amendment first read today, August 11th, 2022.
So, just to be clear, so all the links to the what say that they are the back to school, is it called BPS Awareness 2022-2023 COVID back to school plan, all of those are going to be significantly amended because they're generally it's the RIDO plan, just with variants and words put in, but it's still, it's just the RIDO plan. And so I'm presuming that in the next few days, the RIDO plan will significantly change, especially around quarantine and testing of asymptomatic people. And so, so then that would shift everything. My opinion is that the two things that calls into question are the testing of staff and then the restrictions around volunteers. But I think we need to get what we're going to get from RIDO, and then we can adjust those accordingly based on that new data. But everything else, I didn't see anything else that jumped out at me.
the section on family and student privacy, that sentence about students shall not be recorded is confusing, the way it's phrased.
That, or if of age.
It's the without, shall not be recorded in classrooms, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, yeah.
Without or of age by individuals, students?
Without permission,
Yes.
or if by age, in,
Without permission by,
by parents.
yeah.
Or,
Parents or guardian.
parents and guardians. Or if of age by individual students. There we go, that makes much more sense. That's why it's so hard to say.
There's so many, those prepositions.
Yeah.
That was very confusing.
When all those comments.
Um, So, yes, I understand that, so the policy originally was like 8 pages, now it's 3.5. So a lot of that's been put into our protocols.
Well, so the other stuff too was like some of the stuff that when we first did the policy where we needed to know, like we didn't know how much was gonna change. We didn't know if the superintendent needed to have different, responsibility, right? So that whole section's been removed.
Okay,
All of this stuff has really been shortened because, it's simpler.
okay.
Canva doesn't look simpler, but it is simpler. And, so that was the main thing that was removed. I can't remember what it is.
Well, I mean, overall, it's just for the public as well, so they know when they sort of compare the two.
Yep.
So I did have some specific questions. Understand that, of course, as you mentioned, a lot will change based on however the CDC guidance trickles down. Just in general, we just mentioned RIDO and RIDE guidance here in the policy. We don't talk about the CDC, but I thought we referenced CDC before when we talked about our response.
Yeah, no, they could, well, so the RIDO tends to say what the CDC says, but,
Okay.
but we could certainly, we reference it here on the vaccinations, but we could certainly bring it back into, up into the, is it the policy background and components, where we have RIDE and RIDO at the bottom of that paragraph, it's on C.
Yeah.
We could bring CDC back in.
You know, so under the quarantine, isolation one, could be referenced in there. So just some specific questions. On one of the additions or one of the differences here is the visitors, vendors and family, and asking volunteers or people who are attending or be in the building for more than 15 minutes to wear a mask. And then volunteers need to test each day. It wasn't clear to me are the volunteers self-testing each day and then
No, the
testing?
schools can do it, we have testing. In the same way that the teachers test, the teachers are also tested through the school.
Okay,
So it could be done that way, but then again, I put an asterisk by that, cause I would call that into question with the new guidance. Right, so if we
Okay.
do testing, so if we do have mandatory testing, or we do have required testing in the school, it would be provided by the school. But depending on what the new guidance specifies, then we wouldn't have testing, and then testing would, my understanding from the brief read I got to do is that it's primarily testing of symptomatic people. So volunteers who are symptomatic would not come into the school. Right, so anybody who's symptomatic, no go, regardless of anything else. And then, but kids, we would test for the test to stay.
And then, I think Pat was alluding to this, but the last paragraph, or the last bullet point under vaccinations, all non-volunteer visitors, et cetera, who are in school buildings or attending school meetings shall be required to wear masks, regardless of their vaccination status.
Right, so that has to do with like folks coming in, if they're gonna be within the 6 feet, so like if they're going into a classroom or something.
Okay.
And that's a question, right, based on the new guidance, right?
Right,
But that's a revision from before. But like if
Okay.
someone came to work on, the example we had this morning during policy, if somebody comes to work on the HVAC and they're gonna be in the HVAC room by themselves, they're not wearing a mask, but I believe they were masking last year. Yeah, so that's not a super change, it's more just defining the 6 feet thing. But I
Right.
think CDC walked away from that part.
Okay.
So, yeah,
And
so
that-
that part also could potentially just change.
A small room is also sort of up to, open to interpretation, so.
Yeah, I would say that most of the rooms in most of our schools are small, so, yeah.
So will that also, so just to reflect on that, right, so I'm hesitant for the first read because a lot of these language, like these bullets may shift if we change the policy later, but we don't know if we're gonna change the policy until we're later, so
Right.
I feel like we're in a bit of limbo.
Well, so we can approve it as written with the expectation that those items that are going to be influenced by the CDC guidelines would be for revision. When we bring it back for second read, if we feel that there's been enough revision to the policy that it's too different and we consider that a first read again, then we would do a first read, we would basically repeat the first read before we vote to approve it.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does.
Right, so it just depends on if, and that can be a decision we make at that point, like if these don't change, then it's the same thing and then we're discussing it again. But if these items change, then we would go for a first read again, because it's changing too much of the policy to consider it the same thing.
So, okay,
Yeah, I think the important part was like kind of just getting it out there so that we're talking about it, the school year officially is ending for 2022.
Summer school's open.
Summer school ended, so
Right,
it
right.
ended, so we needed a policy in place that we're getting ready for the new year, and we needed to have enough time to get it ready. But we have a meeting next week, and we can always. Yeah.
well, let's plow on it. So I felt like in reading other policies from other school committees in Rhode Island, there was a clear section for masking. I think one of the biggest confusions we had for members of our public, parents, students, that what's masking, so, I thought that last bullet is about masking, it's not about vaccination, because it's regardless of their vaccination status, so I felt like it was a masking related item.
I think it had fallen under vaccination, so it's really, this vaccinations should be like, it's people in schools, it's the adults in schools, right, is what that section should really be called. I don't know what, I don't wanna call it adults in schools, but it's really kind of how we're, cause that previously, it had been an issue. If you were unvaccinated, you weren't allowed to come into the school if you were a vendor.
Right, so, I think maybe I'm zoomed out a little bit, so, because what I read for other districts, it was saying that right now our schools are mask optional, but should that change according to the state, we will then go back to a mask mandate as determined by the superintendent in consultation with, whether it's a physician or someone. We don't say what our policy is here specifically about masking, or then what our status is of masking.
Well, so that's in the policy, that's in the protocol, right? So they're making explicit, and certainly we can ask if that's a reasonable thing to do, but the masking is in there, right? So the people who have to mask, or required to mask, are, the people who are, on post day 5 of isolation.
Okay.
And then, at this time in there, it's, people who are on quarantine, so they've had a close exposure. But if that changes, then our masking policy has always aligned with what the RIDO guidance is.
Okay.
So that's why I think there's not a specific thing. We could certainly bring that into it and say that our masking policy, but masking is part of, we don't specify, our ventilation will meet this criteria, we don't have that here. We don't have specific things in our thing related to like how big a group can be, and we don't have that because that all changes based on the level of community spread.
Right.
So if you're in green, yellow, it's one thing, if you're in orange, you're another, and, so I think if I remember correctly from when we first discussed this, the benefit of doing it this way was that it allows the system to be flexible based on what the guidance is. And so we respond to the guidance and what the levels are, right? If we write a thing saying we do not have a mask mandate, then we have to come back and do a policy to say, well, we do have a mask mandate now, because right now we went into orange, right? So, like,
Okay, so.
does that make sense? But what you're saying is that you've seen in other things is that we'll just have masks as required. I mean, we can certainly put a sentence that says we'll have masks required as recommended by RIDO and CDC.
Yeah, I think that's what these are the policies
Yeah.
they just said. They just said we're following their guidance, and depending on, when RIDO changes its criteria for our district, we then will respond according to their chart. Like, it took a lot of the onus off of us. Again, I just think from a tangible or personal experience level, that was one of the more confusing elements. Like, when I was reading the policy about people masking in the schools, I was remembering last year when there were people in the schools who were not masking, who may not have been volunteers, but spent extended time, like career day, 4 or 5
Yeah.
hours in the classroom.
Yep.
And so it was what we were talking about on some level in certain very specific cases didn't seem consistent with what we had exited the year with. So I was trying to find some clarity on that, so, okay. I think, all right, we'll keep going
So
through.
yeah, so I agree with pulling that last one off and kind of putting it into a separate, or changing this vaccination thing to, you know, mitigation by adults, or, you know, mitigate, it doesn't apply to students, it only applies to the adults in the school.
Okay.
So I don't know, I mean, we can certainly ask legal for like, what's the best way to clarify that?
Okay.
What's the legal way to say adults in schools? And then be specific about, we were talking about both vaccinations and other things, but again, all that might go away with the new CDC guidance.
I still have to say, I'm saying it for the.
Yeah,
for the
no, I
record, for sure.
understand 100%, and I agree that the last bullet doesn't fit under vaccinations, and, I think we just went to the next page, so we didn't notice that.
Okay. So on the, at a just a macro level, I know this back to school, awareness is a draft now, and it's due on the 22nd. Has it?
Well, I don't know if it's gonna be the 22nd now.
Right, but I'm just saying, so we're first reading a policy that has a protocol, but the protocol, is it, who approves this? Is it the state, RIDE approves this, and then it
Yes.
comes back to us?
Yeah.
So I don't, you know, it's technically possible that we could be reading into the record eventually, not today, a policy that has protocols that are not yet finalized.
Well, so the protocols can always change, right? Protocols aren't read, that's not our purview. Our purview is we say we support the superintendent's protocol, and then the superintendent adjusts the protocol based on what RIDO or RIDE or anybody else that tells us what to do says, right? So, and it says specifically in here, these protocols may change as directives and guidance from RIDO and RIDE change over the school year, right? And that's true, that's been true every year, right? That's why we had all the changes last February and March, but there was no change in the policy, because those are all protocols, and we've directed the administration to take care of that.
I appreciate you
Yep.
speaking through this. And
Yeah,
so
no, it's no problem.
I think that, I guess for me, it's like a chicken and egg thing, so reading both at the same time, so
Yeah,
maybe that's
well,
part
no,
of the
it's very
challenge.
hard. I read the protocol first, and I was incredibly confused. And then I went back and read the RIDO guidelines, which, I think we should use, but then today at 1:00, we learned that they're gonna change. So I almost would put the Canva thing, the draft, I would kind of put that to the side for the moment while we wait to hear what the guidance is gonna be from the state. I presume the 22nd is gonna be a moving target, because,
Okay.
I don't know how they could require the schools to start a school year with old recommendations from June in place when we have new recommendations from August.
So August, right, okay. Well, that's, okay, and I mean, so since the school committee does not write the protocols, it's the district's purview. I mean, I will say that my personal experience with it was very confusing to read these. And I, admittedly, because I tried online and it wasn't designed, I don't think it was meant to be done that way. But there's no table of contents, so I couldn't find certain items, and I couldn't, some pages reference other pages, but I couldn't find the other pages because it didn't tell me what page it was.
So what we discussed at policy, just so you know that other people have had the same conversation, is that what we discussed at policy is instead, whatever RIDO puts out will be what we will use as our base. They have a table of contents, they have everything, and then if there's gonna be something that Barrington is adding or changing or amending, or that they say you have to have more explanation here, we're gonna slide a slide in and say this is Barrington specific.
Okay,
Because there was a misunderstanding this morning that somehow all the stuff that was in the Canva is Barrington specific. It is not, it's
No.
primarily a RIDO document that's just had different clip art and been put in a different order,
yes,
which made it, I think, confusing.
all right.
So, so I think if we just roll back and say, we're doing what RIDO says to do, I didn't see anything in our Canva that was different than what RIDO recommended, but,
Yeah.
it will be clearer if it's done as the RIDO document with Barrington added, if there are specific things that we do.
I think that would just be great for the public as well, because they
But
can
it'd be great
compare.
for me, yeah, no,
And just be like, this is, we are following right over
Yeah.
this version.
because it got very confusing and low and medium and high, and I didn't know what we were talking about, and I was like, oh, the columns, okay, so, yeah, I think that was the best effort to put forward with what we had,
Yeah.
but, it's,
Okay, all right, so, okay,
it needs to be redone. So, can you imagine that being a better item, yeah, like the Rido guidance basically that already is laid out in chapters, and yeah, like you saw that, yeah.
It has, also, like, there wasn't a
There's
sense
table
of like
comment.
what the low, medium, high was in this document, I couldn't tell what it was, but I
Yes,
know Rido
yes,
has
it
it
got
mapped
left
out.
Yeah. it got
So,
left out.
okay, that would help our
Yeah.
community members too.
Yeah, no, it would help me.
Speaking of which, so I couldn't, in the we referenced that our illness and contact tracing protocols were found in this plan, I couldn't find the contact tracing protocols in the plan. I did find the illness one, so I don't know if I just wasn't able to find it,
Okay.
or not,
Maybe
but it's something
make sure
that's
that's in the protocol.
worth to be in there, yes.
I mean, it's definitely in the Rido one, so,
Yes, I did see it there,
Yeah.
so,
so.
but again, that could be my error. I did, so thank you.
Yeah.
Going back to the, putting notes on the back of the document that you're reading is not helpful.
It's not helpful.
Sorry, everybody. On the, under the vaccination piece and on the, request for exemptions, now, because we didn't necessarily honor religious exemptions last time for staff, do we wanna specify with our exemption bullet item what exemptions we are honoring? Or is that just going to be left open, one, and two, are we willing to put a timeline on there for exemption requests for the people who are making them, or should that be open-ended?
That would be a protocol, I believe that's part of the protocol in the, it's not necessarily in our Canva thing, because that's not part of the protocol, it's an HR protocol.
Okay,
No, I don't think so, I wouldn't put a time there.
okay,
And anybody can apply for an exemption at any time, but there's no limit on who can apply,
okay,
so I wouldn't limit it there,
okay.
right?
Alright, so maybe we could, if there is an HR policy about applying for exemptions, we could link to that, or so the staff member or whoever would know that, because it's obviously, it's not here.
I think last year that went out in a separate
Yes.
notification, yeah.
In communication amongst the process.
Okay. Maybe we can just link to that,
Sure.
so that people would know. So we close that loop. Okay. Some of the stipulations on the vaccine does relate to, the timing, right, of when you should be getting a booster, when they're calling a booster, not to get a booster. Is that something that BPS is tracking? So, or do people, you know what I mean, like, so should I be getting a booster, should I not be getting a booster when I'm a certain age? How's that?
Great, so that was, that's a voluntary thing, people are
Okay.
welcome to do that. I believe the recommendations for things are made based on what is available to the school district at that time.
Okay,
People don't have to share it if they don't want to, with the
Right.
exception of the initial two, or
Okay.
the initial series.
Right, so I'm just trying to understand when a staff member would move to not up to date, like they may be up to date, but, by November or December, they may be not up to date and they need to be tested. Is that just up to the staff member to then self-identify?
Well, no, the person who's doing the evaluation, just like at work, I get asked how many I've had, and I have to verify how many I've had to OHS. So it's at that moment that you are being contacted by the person who's doing the contact tracing or the positive or whatever, right?
Okay.
But we just talked about how contact tracing is kind of going away, so, and quarantine's going away, so,
Okay.
yeah, so all of that may become
Okay,
irrelevant.
okay, but so tentatively, the plan moving forward without the CDC guidance would have been that there's HR or someone who's monitoring this, letting the staff know, hey, you are now in the test 2 times a week zone, and the teachers will be,
Right,
staff
the
will tell the test.
HR would do that, and HR.
HR will be doing that, okay, okay. I did, in some of the other, district policies, they did have a portion where they kind of asked parents like what do you have athletes sign that you're not gonna cheat? Like an honor code, they had something to say that they were going to daily screen, before they did come into school, I didn't see anything about
That
daily
was-
screening.
That was
Oh,
old. That
like
was
the
old.
attestation.
That was an attestation. We never did the attestation because it was, partly because it was considered incredibly burdensome. And I think maybe the first year, it was done at the beginning of the
Yeah, it
year,
was.
but I don't think we did it again.
Yeah.
I don't
In
remember
the
signing
beginning of the
anything last year.
pandemic, it was
Yeah.
done every day.
2020, well, the teachers did it every day and the families did it at the beginning of the school year. At this point though, there's, I believe it's in the school handbooks, if you're, sick and you meet these criteria, you don't come to school and you contact the school nurse, so.
Okay,
We haven't generally done it that way, and people have been pretty good.
Yeah, still in procedures.
Oh, just, I know, I didn't know if the school committee wanted to issue I know other districts like Northampton have issued a resolution about the importance of the vaccine and people, promoting sort of general health. I know we did just do one like safety. If we want to consider a resolution that spoke to the value about the vaccine in terms of keeping our educational community healthy versus just as policy in general terms, or if we think it's redundant because we have a policy. I think that we're gonna find that my only reason for that is that we know the pandemic is going to ebb and flow, hopefully we're ebbing, over time. But that's just consistent with data and science that, the vaccine does make a difference for individuals. If that's something we wanted to do, and I'm certainly willing to table that until the full committee can consider it.
We can certainly do that. I think that, I don't know, do you remember what districts those were in?
Little Compton for sure that I saw, because they didn't do a vaccination mandate. I have to go back and see which other ones there were.
Little Compton did a vaccine.
I don't think they did. I think they retired it, but, anyway, so I'll go back, I can go find some more, but I know Little Compton certainly issued a,
Well, I think they probably did that. If they had a vaccine mandate and they walked away from it, then they probably issued that in response. I think that we are still having a certain degree of one. I would also argue that Barrington is one of the most vaccinated towns in the state of Rhode Island. And so I feel kind of comfortable that our community knows that. But
I think
I
it's
tend
consistent.
I tend to not be a resolution person, so that's just my
Right.
I do
personal
feel
bias.
like that's an agenda, that's actually a discussion item, an agenda
Yeah.
setting for a future
Yeah,
meeting.
so we can do that.
that's better than that
Yeah.
section, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions or thoughts or,
Is there a policy meeting before next week's meeting, we should look at guidance?
yes?
Just have that, okay. Thank you, team policy.
We just said it, yes.
Okay,
Yeah, we have it, Thursday afternoon.
okay.
Hopefully the CDC and Rhino will.
Is there active?
Yeah, but Rhino doesn't have that many people, so I don't know, we'll see.
Okay.
There's a lot of understands.
So the next item is the consent agenda, but we can't actually vote on any of the things that are there because we don't represent a quorum for any of those meetings, so that will be deferred to the next meeting. So then, this is our first, really only opportunity tonight for this short meeting for public comment. So if you have an item for public comment, I didn't bring anything, we just, it's 3 minutes and, we'll. Is there anybody on?
You have to switch to attendance so that I can see if there are any hands go up. But we can do that while our first person is speaking.
Okay, and I just ask you to say your name and your address, and we will, for the record, so. Okay.
My name is Susanna Holloway. I live at 64 Fales Avenue in Barrington. I hereby petition for a town-wide referendum for each one of the voting residents of Barrington to have a vote on the scope of the school building project, which the school building committee has considered and they have recommended option 2B. I ask that the school committee put this petition request for a town-wide referendum on the scope of the building project itself on your agenda for August 18th, and that you consider it and decide. This request for a town-wide referendum on the scope of the building project itself, including the options examined by the school building committee, as well as an option for no building project as has been considered, is supported by the regulations of the Rhode Island Department of Education. This can be demonstrated in the checklist, which was attached to the November 16th, 2021 letter, which you all received from Mario Carreño's office at the School Building Authority. Number 7 of the checklist says local support. You all have to absolutely confirm, and certifications will be filed to support this. Districts must submit documentation of community support for the project, including city/town council and school committee approvals. Please include a timeline for when the project will be submitted to voters for approval if applicable. I say this is a huge building project. This is not just one school building, as is also contemplated by this whole necessity of school construction. You could apply for just doing one building, but you all are in the process of applying for doing a huge revamping of our elementary school program. And I petition and hereby demand that you give us a town-wide referendum on the scope of the project as supported and contemplated by RIDE. Furthermore, you held this public May workshop and I was excluded from attending. I wanted to attend. I submitted a written request to attend. At the April 7th meeting of the school building committee, clearly members of the school building committee stated they wanted members of the Committee on Appropriations to attend the public May workshop. I was the only member of the Committee on Appropriations who applied to attend the May workshop. Mike Masori wrote me a letter on your behalf and as your agent saying there was no room for me. So give us this referendum, and the school building committee members, as per the RIDE regulations under 2B, state that there must be a local budget official or member of the local finance committee, and that was me, the vice chair of the Committee on Appropriations, where Cynthia Rosengard, the chair, has consistently said she didn't serve as chair on the school building committee, but just in her individual capacity. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Any other public comment?
Yes. My name is Shelley Edgar. I live at 14 South Meadow Lane. I'm here to support the petition that Susanna Holloway just suggested you put on the docket for next week, or the 18th. And I just want to review, I think there's a lot of support for the fact that our facilities need some investment. But this notion that the public has been properly engaged is just nefarious and ridiculous. So I just want to review the 3 mechanisms for which I think this notion of public engagement has happened. The first being a survey that was sent out. And online there are various forums in which people said, this survey is so ridiculously constructed. And I just want to read the words of Cynthia Rosengard, who is on the building committee, as she says, heavy sigh. Members of the building committee worked on putting together the survey, and it was based on information that was provided to us by the consultant, which was working to gather information from the community. Unfortunately, I agree with you that the questions are leading and that there is no space for additional concerns to be raised. It is problematic. Then, one of the community members says this very well and represents, I think, the common thread that has been expressed by many community members, which is, I think we need to rewrite the survey. It's a high-stakes survey that will misrepresent community's thoughts and priorities, because whoever says he or she is against equity, arts, and ample space for children to learn, no one. Yet if the same individual understands that saying yes to these items also means potential demolition of community schools and sharp increases of tax burden, that they are essentially embracing, I'm trying to summarize, essentially the survey was constructed such that the only answer anyone would say is yes, right? That's not a legit survey, and even Cynthia recognized that. The next of the 3 pieces for community engagement was a visioning session. I would encourage anyone from the public to go to the building committee website and pull up the 4-4 visioning session. go close to 2 hours in and listen to those 20 minutes, where a few members who were taxpayers representing us and asked to do the visioning session offer comments. The theme is incredible and consistent, that they all say they are dismayed at what they thought was supposed to be a workshop and ended up being a sales pitch. 2 hours of a sales pitch. And all of them say that. The last one is the deep dive session that was comprised much of building committee members, school committee, administrators and employees of the school, with a small segment allocated to taxpayers, and those taxpayers were handpicked by the administration. This is not public engagement. If it doesn't smell like public engagement and it doesn't taste like public engagement, whatever you call it, you can call it public engagement, it is not public engagement.
Thank you.
Hi, Kira Richardson, 61 Whipple Avenue. I was going to explain how the last 2.5 years of your COVID policies have done irreparable damage to my kids, and how although most are now done and out of the district, I was beyond irate that my youngest, after a fun and anxiety-free summer, is preparing to enter back into the nightmare that his educational journey has become of late, due in large part to what I feel is the misguided, overreaching, discriminatory COVID policies that this district was looking to bring back once again. However, I soon realized that if my heartfelt good faith letters that I have sent to the administration in the past, sharing deeply personal and gut-wrenching details of some of my kids' struggles, did not even warrant a sliver of acknowledgement, let alone a personal response, then why was I going to waste my breath trying to appeal to your humanity again? So instead, I just ask you to please provide in detail what the rationale for your current proposed COVID policy is for the fall. Is it because you have conducted the only randomized controlled trial in existence that shows that masking and mask mandates prevents the spread of COVID? Because if so, you would be the first in the world to prove so. Other than OSHA licensed and personally checked N95s, it's been proven that no other mask or mask mandates has had any statistical effect in slowing the spread of COVID-19 anywhere. And neither, for that matter, the vaccine and its many boosters. So why urge the mandate to discriminate against students and teachers? What is your fact and data-based evidence that these policies do anything but further divide and isolate people and cause more irreparable harm to our youth? So it seems maybe, as you have said, that you prefer to claim to be following orders from RIDO or the CDC. Well, as far as the state goes, the interim director of the Rhode Island Department of Health agreed, under oath, mind you, that we are not in an emergency, we are no longer in a pandemic, but rather endemic, and that he was not consulted by Governor McKee to declare yet another state of emergency. At this point, not to mention that these vaccines are still only emergency use authorized with no state mandate, but yet we want to discriminate and build policy around them. So it's not state mandate, but you can't say you're following the CDC recommendations either now. As we all know, today they eased their COVID guidance, saying schools no longer need social distancing, contact tracing, test to stay programs, and they do not recommend quarantining if not infected, regardless of vax status. Yay, the CDC has finally come around to individual decisions. It's now Barrington Schools' times to follow suit. However, I do know in the past, BPS has had no issue instituting a more stringent protocol than what RIDO has, so I don't know that you have always just followed RIDO. But my hope is that you will not only amend all of your policies that Mr. McCran had read earlier, but that you can align with the CDC, lift all the masking, testing, and quarantining protocol regardless of COVID status, and you can wrap up your new COVID policy as if you were sick, stay home, come back when you're better.
Staffed 5 Robbins Drive. I'm not going to reiterate. Kira spoke eloquently and to a lot of what my point was, and that's the best policy going. If you're sick, stay home, and you better come back. And that's how most of the country is working right now. I think
think I have one concern, and my concern is that you're saying that you follow RIDO and the CDC, but I heard Dr. Douglas, under her breath here, say that there was gonna be some type of vaccine mandate still in place. I heard you say something that the vaccines are gonna stay there. Whatever, I'll wait to see what comes to next week. All I know is that both my kids are in college, they accept religious exemptions, they no longer do asymptomatic testing, even if you're unvaccinated. My daughter's in a health professions field, at a dental school, they've lifted all that immediately as of, to yesterday. They're not gonna be doing anything on vaccinated people. And I think it's awful that we will not allow parents to come into the school if they're not vaccinated. That needs to end. If you're gonna follow CDC, I ask that you follow CDC through and through, including the vaccine mandate. I also am gonna put a plug in for the 3 teachers that were fired. This record turnover in this district, I've never seen anything like it. My kids are, 22 and 19. They started in kindergarten here. And the fact that we have so many turnovers, I think you should rehire those teachers. What we're going through is absolutely awful. And I think that you talk a lot about social, emotional, and the mental health issues. I think that the kids need to come back to school, the teachers need to come back to school. We need to move forward and try to rebuild what's happening in our community. And my other thing is that, as a taxpayer, fighting these vaccine mandates in court is not gonna get us anywhere, except a lot of money thrown out. And it's getting ridiculous, so that's all I'm gonna say about that.
Thank you.
Ellen Schaefer, and I support Ms. Holloway's petition and everything that Kira said and Lisa. I want to reiterate to the public that whatever or however the RIDO and CDC guidance changes over the next week, this is still only guidance and recommendations and is no way enforceable. Any mandate with regard to COVID at this point in time must go through full state regulatory process. This was reinforced by Dr. McDonald, the director up through July of the Rhode Island Department of Health. The Department of Health is not telling you what to do. There was a number of times that you referred to, Ms. Douglas, you referred to the Department of Health telling you what to do, or you said what RIDO says to do. They are not telling this district what to do. They are giving guidance and recommendations. And you can submit all the advice and medical advice that you want to the district, but no child and no parent is subject to the medical advice of Mr. Missouri, Paula Dillon, Ms. Douglas, whether you're a doctor or not. People haven't hired you to be their medical physician. You cannot keep a child out of school for not wearing a mask, regardless of what the Department of Health recommends or doesn't recommend. No parent should get that confused. Nothing of what the administration and the school committee are proposing in this policy, regardless of some tweaks that might be coming along, is enforceable in any manner whatsoever. To the public, your child shall not be excluded from school at any time for refusing to test for COVID, refusing to mask for COVID, or refusing the emergency use only authorized, not approved vaccine for COVID-19. Don't get it confused. These unauthorized medical bullying policies are power grabbing and overreaching. And these individuals will have you believe that they are in charge of your family's and your child's private medical decisions. They are not. No policy in place from this school can dictate on this level that children be kept out. On May 19th and 20th, the Department of Health issued 2 separate memos recommending and reminding school administrators and families of various CDC protocols and recommendations. While the guidance has been updated, it's not substantively different in that this body persists in including masking and quarantine requirements that have no legal standing in the state whatsoever to exclude children from school. In those May memos, RIDO's then director, Dr. James McDonald, used the word word must with regard to mask and quarantine requirements no fewer than 4 times, and then proceeded to swear under oath at the beginning of July that must only meant recommend, and that the memo was, quote, not an enforceable document by the Department of Health. If a letter signed by the director of RIDO using the word must is not enforceable, then what is? Only a state mandate. So I implore the public, if you want your child to come to school and not wear a mask and not test and not be vaccinated for COVID-19, ignore these policies and these medical bullies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Mary Alice Gasparo. I haven't been to a school committee meeting in 30 years. It's been 30 years since I've had a child in the system. But I would speak to you all as an old woman. In August of 1955, my mother took her 4 children to Mount Pleasant High School in Providence to receive the first polio vaccine. I don't think you people have any idea of the fear millions of parents across this country lived with during an epidemic. I only remember 2. My mother said she raised 4 children during 7 epidemics and had 2 close calls. But I do remember the day going to the high school. It was hot as heck. And while we were standing there ready to get the first vaccine, my dad was in the VA hospital dying of heart disease. And my mother used to tell me when I got older, she said, I thought if the Lord was going to take your father, at least protect my children from polio. And I see a lot of this anti-masks and anti-vaccines as a disrespect to millions and millions of the greatest generation, and people like my parents who were older than the greatest generation. You have no idea of the fear they lived with. You don't seem to have that fear, and that's a great thing. I got vaccinated for smallpox. I couldn't go to school unless I had it. And the second day of school, we were vaccinated for DPT, diphtheria, pertussis, and whooping cough, none of which you remember. I remember whooping cough and the measles. It was tough. I went to school with children. We used to go 1 through 8 in the Catholic school system here. I went to school with children who were driven to school every day by volunteer mothers who had a second car. They came with 20 to 30 pounds of metal leg braces on their legs, recuperating from polio. Some of them were crippled for the rest of their lives. And the nuns used to provide lawn chairs for them to sit in the schoolyard during recreation. But I live in Florida 6 months of the year. There's a lot of people who are against the vaccines. They've had a very high rate of death and numbers down there. And people don't care. I see the old people care because we're vulnerable. When I came back from Florida last summer, I had a health problem. I read about the police and the fire not having to be vaccinated in this town, and I said to my husband, if I get sick, just put me in the car with the oxygen tank and take me to Miriam Hospital. I will not allow a fireman in my house. I've lost a lot of friends in this town to COVID, and I know because they're old, nobody cares. But while they were here, they were good members of this community. And they did a lot more than a lot of you young people. And I think, you better think twice. I don't wish COVID on anybody. I had a dear friend that died last month. Picked it up at Rhode Island Hospital. And he died. Too soon, but he died. But you just ought to think about all of these things because it was a terrible thing to live through. My grandmother got the measles when she was at the old normal school, the teachers' college, and she was left hearing impaired. They gave her a diploma, but she could never teach. Number one, because she got married right after she finished, and you couldn't teach when you were married. And number two, she couldn't hear the children, so she was never able to teach. And because of vaccines, you people have had it fairly easy. I'm nagging my two oldest sons to get the shingles vaccine. They had the chicken pox. You don't want to get the shingles. Maybe you'd rather get the shingles than COVID, but I'll tell you, it's a miserable disease. So, whether you like the vaccines or you don't like the masks, think about what went before you and how people suffered because they didn't have the medical knowledge. And as Dr. Lang said to me many years ago when there was an outbreak of polio in a Christian Science school in Connecticut, he said, what is wrong with people? Why do they allow their children to be exposed to this? What is wrong with them? And I think you need to have a little more trust in science and in the federal government, as my parents had, because they were terrified. And we didn't have to wear masks because we weren't in school. By the time the epidemic hit Rhode Island, it was summer. We knew one was coming because what would happen in the southern part of the country, they would get it in April and May when the weather warmed up, but it was, when I think about it crowding into church, nobody wore masks, but they had no idea at that point in time how it was communicated from one to another. And I was reading, if any of you are into the astronomy, they're having a sighting this week at the Frosty Drew Center down at Charlestown. And Frosty was a neighbor of ours at Green Hill in the summer, and he got polio in the last epidemic, and he never recuperated. He died in a wheelchair.
Thank you so much for your input.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I have one more person up there that's interested in speaking. Is there anybody else here who would like to make a comment? Okay. Do we do it up there, Nancy, or? Oh, we got it.
Maura, you should be,
She can't hear us, nothing's on. Maura,
Maura,
you should be all set.
Yeah, she's muted.
Are you muted on this one and this one?
Yeah,
Okay.
and even when I just turn on this one, that happens, so,
She's talking.
Just try.
You can try unmute it. And we'll go
Oh, this one and this one? Yeah. Okay. And even when I just turn on the phone, that happens.
Right here.
yeah. If you unmute that one, does it work without
I don't
causing
think
the
this
background noise?
I'm not sure if this one, is this one muted?
Laura, if you'd like to speak, you can unmute yourself.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes, thanks. We're having
Okay,
issues with
there
background.
was just some background noise. I'm Laura McCann for Woodford Road. I just wanted to put something forward for the policy committee. I'm wondering, and I don't know that this is the right place for it, so I apologize. I know you have a threat assessment policy, which was reviewed last January of 2021. And I was just wondering if we could, if I could make a request that the people really relook at that policy. Some best practices now on school threat assessments. I'm thinking of the recent school shooting in Texas. Really recommends more than just a policy when there's a threat, but doing more preventative work, having a team that's meeting at least monthly and really looking at concerning behaviors as they start to escalate. If that is already happening, I can't find it on the website, so I apologize if it is happening, but I just wanted to put that out there. Anything more that we could do around prevention work around threats and identifying students of concern and talking about them in outreach and resources and connection earlier is really in line with best practices at this point in time. So I just want to put that out there for the policy committee if that's not already happening.
Oh, sorry.
you can keep copying. You should keep your.
No, because I muted it.
Yeah, this is unmuted. She can.
Laura, can you hear me? It's unmuted. It's asking, it has to be unmuted at that place. I was able to mute myself, but not unmute myself. I just want to say thank you. Yeah, Laura, sorry about that. It's just complicated. Thank you very much for your comment.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry. There's another. Okay.
I think Nancy. Are you getting the next one, Nancy?
You want me to do it, or you
Oh, no, we did not. But that needs to be, is it still on?
Everything's
Hi, Lori. If you'd like to speak, you can unmute yourself and turn on your camera.
Hello, Barrington School Committee. The camera on this device doesn't work, and I just wanted to jump in. It's Lori Gavis-Barrett here from Parents United Rhode Island, and I wanted to reiterate some of the comments that I heard from your parents earlier about your COVID-19 policy. And for the benefit of your, for the members that are there tonight, and for the benefit of your audience, I wanted to share with you that I have received information about a meeting that took place yesterday between the Rhode Island Department of Education, the Rhode Island Department of Health, the Rhode Island Association of School Committees, and your chair, the Barrington School Committee, was there. I am well aware, based on the clips that I've seen, that your chair is also aware that the guidance that's put out from the Rhode Island Department of Health has no force of law. There's no rule, there's no mandate, it's nothing, it's guidance. And so if the Rhode Island Department of Health itself cannot enforce the guidance that they give to you, I think that's an important point for you to consider as you go through your policy, because you cannot, and I know that you've tried, and I know that you've been in court, and I know that you've lost, or at least on the open meetings part. So I think it's really, really important for everyone to understand, even the Rhode Island Department of Health concedes that the COVID-19 is in the endemic phase. And as we heard from other speakers earlier tonight, the CDC is recognizing this is back to individual choice. And I really, really hope that the Barrington School Committee understands and takes that into account before they pass a policy that's even stricter than what can legally be enforced by the governor, the Rhode Island Department of Health, and the Rhode Island Department of Education, because you're really just looking at a fresh new round of lawsuits. And I wanted to end with letting you know that I've received phone calls and text messages from 4 parents from Barrington today who want to sue over the policy that you read for the first time tonight, given the updated CDC guidance. And I just want to be encouraging and let you know there's a path, there's a way out. The path of least resistance is to implement a policy that says parents' choice. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member of the public on Zoom who would like to make a public comment?